going to look at the book of Ruth this week and next Sunday. We're going to look at chapter 1 this Sunday, and then next Sunday we're going to look at chapter 4. It's just 4 short chapters in the Old Testament, but it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. And I hope I can do justice to it. So I want to begin this little short series with just asking this question. What makes for a really good, engaging story? What makes for a really good, engaging story? I think Ruth is one of them amazing, good and engaging stories of the scriptures and of all literature, to tell you the truth. We'll look at that a little bit more next week. But because I'm thinking about this and want you to think about it, I wrote a very short fairy tale type of story that I wrote kind of just for us. And I want you to let me know if you think that this story, after it ends, again, it's very, very short, if it's a good and an engaging story. A prince was born in a land far, far away. Everything was awesome. His father, the king, he was good, he was wise, and he was loving. His mother, the queen, oh, was she beautiful, and she was kind, and she was loving. He had an amazing childhood, and he was such an obedient child. And through his teen years, he always honored his mother and his father. And then he got older, and he never had to fight a dragon. Everybody loved him and knew that one day he would make a great king. And so he married the most beautiful and nicest girl. They had 5 well-adjusted children. Again, everything was so awesome. He reigned decades as a good, a wise, and a low taxes king. He never had a financial scandal, never a moral scandal. He always lived squeaky clean. Then he died. Everything was awesome. How many of you would pay $5 to go see that on a Tuesday? None of us. Because it's a story that has no reality to it. No story is like that. No prince, no king. None of us here this morning has a story that is like that. There's no brokenness in it. So a good, engaging story, where we live and we learn from broken stories. Again, we all live broken stories. So when we do pay the $5 on Tuesday, what stories do you go see? Some of you probably have gone to see Toy Story 4. I haven't yet, but I've seen the other 3. And I've cried during some of those. What the heck? It's an animated story. Why am I crying? Because there was a brokenness, and childhood was passing. When you go to see the Avengers, and some of us have seen all 20 and counting of them. In the last one, the end game. And the Avengers, from the evil forces that wanted to come in and break this world even more than it's broken, was saved. They saved the world again. And mark my word, the next Avengers, even though Iron Man died, oh, sorry, spoiler alert. Remember the story Frozen? Even though with Iron Man died, he might get risen. Just like in Frozen. Where did they get that story? So we go to these good, engaging stories because it's the story of all of our lives. We know we're broken, we know we're broken, we know we're broken, but is there good? So again, you're in a church this morning, obviously, but do you know that every story of Jesus, in the story of Jesus, is just broken, 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 broken? I mean, we love reading the stories of Jesus because they're real. They're not a fairy tale. So A broken woman comes to him at the well in the heat of a day, and he's good to her. It's early in the morning, and some religious types bring a broken woman caught in the act of sin, and Jesus is good to her. Jesus is passing by, and a man that's got broken eyes, he can't see. And he cries out, and Jesus is good to him. There's a little girl, and she's only 12, and she's an only child, and she dies, and the broken hearts of the mom and dad, and he goes in, and he's good. And then the very story of Jesus, the reason you came into this space today, whether you know it or not, is because there's something good about the story of Jesus, even though it's a broken story. He comes into this world because it's so broken, and he allows himself to be broken, as we just remembered in communion, because he wants us to know that as we live broken stories, at the very same time, God is so good. And sometimes that's so troublesome to us. How can God be good with brokenness like another shooting? How can God be so good when another young woman is trafficked? A young girl. Somehow in the midst of whatever brokenness there is in this world, God is so good at the very same time. And but we know it's true. You know it's true. That's why you'll keep going to some of the movies. Because there's always going to be brokenness, but yet some kind of resolution of good. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't go to a movie. It would just despair, and no hope. So one of the followers of Jesus, he's the Apostle Paul. Man, does he know brokenness. When I read the story of his life and the story of all the things that happen against him, such brokenness. But yet he believed God is so good, God is so good, God is so good. So at the very same time, he would write these things. They're just there at the very same time. So he writes in Romans chapter 8 these amazing words. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves, again, brokenness. Instead, you've received God's Spirit when he adopted you, because you know, even if you had great moms and dads, they have limits to themselves. If you had bad moms and dads, they even have limits to themselves. But God wants to adopt us as his own children because he's so good. Now we call him Abba Father. You know, this is the only religion in the world. Christianity is the only religion in the world that has that kind of view of God as an Abba. Again, for us, it's that when our children are real small, we say, Daddy, Daddy, because we Abba. Every other religion, it's, well, yeah, there's a powerful God. And if you step out of line, he's good. Jesus says, we've got an Abba Father. And even when we step out of line, he might correct us and it might hurt. But it's for our good. So it's Abba Father. For his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. That possessive apostrophe S. I'm always teaching after that. There's glory. You get some glimpses of glory in this world, but there's no lasting glory. But God says there is a glory that is eternal, and it's my glory, but I'm going to share it with you. I want to share it with you. I want you to be with me in my eternal glory. And then it says, but if we are to share his glory, at the very same time, we also have to share his brokenness. It's undeniable. But then he says this, yet what we suffer now is nothing to be compared to the glory that is to come. There's young, broken girls that have been trafficked in ways that and they believe in his glory because they were trafficked, but there was a comma in God's glory came into their lives, and God is so good to them. There's a comma in every of our lives. We are broken, but there's never a period there, only a comma. We're heading towards God's glory. So we come to the story of Ruth. And again, we're going to see some brokenness in this story. But yet, when we get to the end of the story of Ruth, there's just this beauty burst. And it just goes on and on and on. Again, when we get to the end of the story of Ruth, it's hundreds of years before the time of Jesus. But yet, it's directly connected. The story of Ruth is directly connected to the story of Jesus. And we'll look at that more next week. So again, here's where we're going today. Just going to keep coming back to this idea. We live broken stories. God is so good. Let's say these two short sentences together, please. We live broken stories. God is so good. So again, I hope I can convey the brokenness of the story that is the story of Ruth. If you were to open up your Bibles this week, and again, maybe you want to read this short story, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, very, very short. If you open up your Bibles, your paper Bibles to the book of Ruth, if you just turn back one page, you'll read the last verse in the book of Judges, and we're going to make a connection here why it is that it might be important to read this last verse in Judges. The last verse in Judges says, "In those days Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit." There's all kinds of brokenness in the book of Judges. I mean, if you were to read and that's a much longer book than the book of Ruth, but Judges, it's not G-rated, especially when you get to the end of some of the chapters. I mean, we think that we've got brokenness in our world today. There's some of the brokenness that's described in the end towards the last chapters of the book of Judges that just make you, how can this even be in the Bible? Such brokenness. Yet God is so good in all that brokenness. At the very same time, God is so good, God is so good, God is so good. So here's why I want us to connect Judges with the book of Ruth, because Ruth opens up in these days, in verse opening, in the days when the judges ruled. 1,000 plus years before the time of Jesus, the story that we're going to read about in Ruth happens in that time frame, when there's all this brokenness out there. So there was a famine in the land. Again, when we read famine in our American culture, it's hard for us because we go to grocery stores and, man, all the food. We go to farmers markets and, man, all the food. We have no idea what a famine. I've never known a famine in all of my 60 plus years of life. But when we read that word in the Bible, just stop for a moment. People died because there wasn't enough food. People, they suffered a day, 2 days. And then we read, there's a man from Bethlehem. And again, all of us who are reading the Bible these days, as soon as we hear Bethlehem, ding, 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 we go to Christmas, we go to Jesus, we go to the manger, we go to all the songs, we go to Silent Night, we go to Joy to the World, and we just think, man, everything is awesome in Bethlehem. Not everything was awesome in Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, which means in Hebrew, the house of bread, there's no bread. So this man that we're introduced to, he's got to make a decision. Do me and my wife stay in Bethlehem with our 2 young sons and maybe die? Or do we go to a place where there is some bread, where I can work and we can have food and our boys can live? So we read together with his wife and 2 sons, they went to live for a while in the country of Moab. And again, we hear Moab, and we just kind of skip, oh, okay, so like I grew up in Iowa, went to college in Nebraska, went to seminary in Indiana, moved down to southern Missouri, and then been up here in Neenah, Wisconsin for 30 plus years now. So we just kind of think, oh, okay, they just moved to, that makes sense. They go, no. When a Jewish person reads this, they want to turn and spit. Because Moab in the past they've killed some of the ancestors of the Jews. It's not a country that, is got a 5-star rating in the mind of a Jew. So again, there's just something that just unsettling in this. And then we get the names. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. Again, Bethlehem, don't forget. Bethlehem, that's the masterpiece of this artist. That Bethlehem, we're going to see that next week in another phrase that he keeps repeating over and over again. Don't forget, this is Bethlehem, this is Bethlehem. This is where the story goes. And they went to Moab and they lived there. Now the next few verses, Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Verse 3. First half of verse 3, died, and then she's left with her 2 sons. Okay, they can take care of mom. They're probably teenagers now. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah. Again, you see in the name Orpah, we know there's a very, very famous woman named Oprah, that they just kind of reverse the letters there, and so that's where a good bit of trivia next time you're at a party. And the other, Ruth, so here's the namesake of the book. After they had lived there about 10 years, so maybe the boys are teens, maybe early 20s. Again, they get married pretty young back then, still today in some places of the world. Both Mahlon and Chilion also, what a broken word, died. And Naomi, she's left without her 2 sons and her husband. There's no Social Security. She didn't have her parents waiting for her back in Bethlehem. She doesn't have a sister or a brother waiting to somehow take her in. And so again, well, here's some pictures of a lady that I know in Thailand. This is Yiga. She's a widow. She's very poor. She's destitute. She knows hunger. She lives in a remote mountain village in Thailand. She's actually of the Karen tribe. And I want to show you this picture because Ruth and Naomi probably look a lot more like Yiga than any of us, any of you ladies here this morning. Yiga, this is in 2019. She's living now in 2019. There's no running water. There's no electricity. When she cooks some kind of meager meal to just kind of stave away a little bit of the hunger, it's with an open fire. She comes to the ministry there and oftentimes receives some of the food that is distributed there. In the picture on the left, she's in one of the buildings and she's hearing stories about Jesus. Stories about how God is so good in the midst of this broken world. And in the right, it's at a church service. You can see the guitar behind, and they've got a little songbook or a Bible that's open up, and she's going to be baptized, not as a little baby, but as an adult. Because before this, they didn't really know about Jesus too much in this village. So Yiga is this poor, destitute woman, but behind her eyes, there's a soul that matters to God. Your soul and my soul that's behind our eyes doesn't matter more to God than Yiga's soul, or Ruth or Naomi's. None of us have a special soul because we're living in this culture that we're in the top 4% of the richest people in the world, even though we don't feel like that. But again, none of our children, none of our grandchildren will probably ever know hunger like some of the children in this world know today, and some of the widows in this world know today. So again, sometimes we think, well, we're not as broken as someone else, and so, okay, we're all right. No. Yiga needs Jesus because of her brokenness. I need Jesus because of my brokenness. You need Jesus because of your brokenness. Little Lila needs Jesus because without him, there would just be brokenness. When we look behind the eyes, there's a soul that matters, a soul that matters, a soul that matters, a soul that matters. And God cares about the soul. because he is good. So let's read through the rest of chapter 1. So Naomi, when she heard in Moab, so again, they're still living there, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people back there in Bethlehem by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me." Why did she say that? Again, this is just a fresh thought, a new thought in this time of studying. I always learn so much more. Again, one of my metaphors for the Bible is that it's this huge motherlode of gold, and I'm on the top of it with just my fingernail, and I'm scratching little slivers off, and it's enough for my heart and my soul and my mind, but there's always so much more to mine. Why does Naomi say, few hours into the trip, a day into the trip? Why did she say it? Maybe. She didn't know if she'd make it back to Bethlehem alive. It's not like they had a huge ration of food in their knapsacks. Maybe the 2 younger women would have the strength to make it back alive, but maybe not. So she invites them to turn. So may the Lord bless you with the security of maybe another marriage. Maybe there was a Moabite man that might marry you. And then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. I mean, just the scene of this. No, they said no. Ruth and, what is it? Orpah said, "We want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth?" And again, this is one of these weird things in the Old Testament. I don't understand it, but there's some kind of deal here. "Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter. Can we feel the emotion of this bitterness that Naomi is speaking? For me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. I am broken, and God is not good. God is not good. God is not good." But he is. Because Naomi is broken, but only with a comma. And again, they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back." Why? Why does Ruth say that? Over the 10 years, when Elimelech was still alive, when Mahlon and Chilion were still alive, Ruth and Orpah heard the stories of this God that they followed. Elimelech and Naomi and the 2 sons told the stories of the creation of the world by a good God. They heard the broken story of how the serpent deceived Eve and Adam and why the world is so broken. They heard the hope of the story that God spoke to Abraham, and even in Abraham and all of his brokenness, God is going to fulfill a promise. And here we are all these years later, and here's how God has multiplied the people of Abraham, the descendants, about Egypt and coming out and the Red Sea, and then so she knows that even in this brokenness, God is so good. So she says these words, and again, it's hard for us to imagine this Gentile Moabite woman speaking words that in almost the rest of the Bible, there's not better words said. There's something that resonates in these worlds, even in the brokenness. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. I don't understand it. I don't like it, but God is so good. And so she says, "Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is this really Naomi? The women asked. Again, it's a small village, and so someone returning and get excited. That. Then we hear these words, don't call me Naomi. Naomi in Hebrew means pleasant. Instead, call me Mara, and Mara in Hebrew means bitter. For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, my husband, my 2 sons, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has done such tragedy upon me? She could not feel or speak the comma, but there's a comma there. And then at the end of chapter 1, again, masterfully written, so Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, a young Moabite woman. And they arrived in Bethlehem. Remember where the story started in the first verses? They're back in Bethlehem. Remember what's going to happen in Bethlehem centuries later? In late spring, at the beginning of the barley harvest. So chapter 1 ends with one little glimmer, one little comma, one little breath of hope. So next week, we're going to look at the end of the story, and again, just this burst with beauty, on and on and on. Again, so hard to imagine from those first 5 verses. Next week, we're going to look all the way to Jesus, the end of the story, all the way to Jesus, and then beyond to us here in 2019. That's what we'll look at next week. But again, this week, let's wrap this up with this idea. We live broken stories. God is so good. Can we hold those together at the very same time? That's what the people of God have done throughout the generations. That's what we're going to see happening in the book of Ruth as we wrap it up next week. We live broken stories. There will still be brokenness even at the end of the good story. But God is so good. He's so good. It's never not true that God is so good. I want to show you a picture of someone. That's Dawn. She's got a beautiful smile. There's a twinkle in her eyes, blonde hair. She's got a soul that matters to God behind those eyes. I have never known anyone more broken in the body than Dawn. What you can't see in this picture, her hands for a number of decades just absolutely all gnarled up. For the last 8 years of her life, she died a few months ago, at the young age of 58. For those last 8 years, she was in a care facility. What you also can't see in this picture, at the end of her life, both of her feet had been amputated, and one of her legs, almost up to the knee, had been amputated. During most of the 8 years, once a month, I'd go over and sit with her in her room. And in the brokenness of her body, behind her eyes, and with her voice, God is so good to me, Pastor Jeff. God is so good to me. I get to pray for people. I get to tell people about Jesus. She always made sure that she would give her tithe to God's church. Share communion with her, the broken body of Jesus, the shed blood of Jesus for the good of her soul. So as I said, she died a few months ago. I've got the sheets from her celebration. So on Sunday, June 16th at 5:51 p.m. in that afternoon, she had her last breath here on this earth. Broken, but only with a comma. Because God is so good, and he gave her the first breath to follow Jesus now and forever. One of the songs that we sang, the Potter's Hand. Some of you might be familiar. You can go YouTube, and it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Again, I made this statement kind of that Dawn, in all the brokenness of her hands, they were beautiful hands. There was a grace to her hands. So her hands here so broken, and again, but when we see her again in glory, will her hands be fixed? Because they were beautiful here, maybe they'll be beautiful there. After saying that, one of her nieces painted a picture, and it's going to come up on the screens. So we know from the resurrection accounts that Jesus' hands, they're still broken after the resurrection. There's a beauty there. It's not broken anymore. And her hands, again, maybe you can see it, the fingers wouldn't even be out, but there's just this deformity of that thumb. Like, they were beautiful here. I think they're going to be beautiful there. One of the other things for her celebration of life, she had this plaque hanging in her room. Don't tell God how big your storm is, how big your brokenness is. Tell your brokenness how big your God is. And that's what Dawn did. She didn't like her brokenness. Oh, the tears that sometimes she would shed. The bitterness of all of her suffering, and again, suffering like I know I will never know. But that God is so good. So again, we live broken stories. God is so good. God's so good story is Jesus. Don't think Jesus is just this kind of floating on air, walking through this world. Every story of Jesus and the story of Jesus is broken, but with a comma, with a comma, with a comma, because God is so good. Ruth, when she speaks those wonderful words that are so inspiring to so many of us, they're words about Jesus that he can speak even better. He can speak even better. Aren't these words true when we think about Jesus? Wherever you go, I will go. So Jesus, he's here with us right now. And some of you go to a foreign country, he's there. Some of you travel all around this nation, he's there with you. Wherever you go, I will go there with you. Wherever you live, I will live. Doesn't matter if you live here, live somewhere else, wherever you've lived in the past, wherever you live in the future, I will live with you. Your people will be my people, and all the other people, and your God will be my God. Because God is so good. So, one day, the story is going to end for all of us. One day I know I'm going to look at the face of my beloved wife, or she's going to look at my face. Because in this broken world, we'll come to that broken moment. But as we are following this Jesus, I'm asking that when I go, I'm going to have an open casket. That's one of those things that don't happen all that much. But I'm going to have an open casket because I'm broken with a comma. And I'm going to have it put a smile on my face, even if it shows my teeth that aren't real pretty. Because God is so good right now, and he will be so good at that moment because God is always so good. He really is. We're going to be around all kinds of people. All this brokenness, all this brokenness, all this brokenness. How can God be so good? How can God be so good? How can God be so good? But every story of brokenness, because when you read the first 5 verses of Ruth, God is not good. But when you read the last verses of Ruth, who is this God? Let's pray.